"You're just a burden now," my son said the night after we buried his father. He said it at the dinner table. Not in anger. Not in the middle of some wild argument. Just calmly, with his hands folded in front of him, as if he were stating the weather or reading a bill out loud. That calmness was what made it land so hard. My daughter-in-law, Romy, didn't even pretend to be shocked. She lowered her eyes to her plate and kept cutting her chicken into neat little pieces. The silverware made a dry scraping sound against porcelain. That sound stayed with me longer than Wade's voice did. The dining room still looked like a room full of grief. Flower arrangements from the funeral lined the sideboard. A tray of baked pasta someone from church had brought was growing cold on the table. Half-melted ice floated in 3 abandoned glasses of tea. The chair at the head of the table, my husband Noel's chair, sat empty, pushed back slightly, exactly where it had been after the last time he used it. I stood beside my own chair with one hand resting on the wood. My fingers felt numb. Wade finally looked at me then. "You heard me, right?" "I heard you," I said. My voice surprised me. It was steady, almost polite. No one corrected him. No one softened what he had said. Romy lifted her napkin and dabbed at the corner of her mouth. Wade looked tired, impatient, as if my pain was one more thing he didn't have room for. "I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and tell me what city you're listening from, because by the next morning, I would find out that my husband had not left me helpless. And my son was about to learn that grief and weakness are not the same thing." I turned and walked upstairs without another word. Behind me the room stayed quiet. That was how I knew the cruelty had been discussed before I ever sat down. The house sounded wrong the next morning. I woke up at 5:37 a.m., the same way I had for most of my married life. For a few seconds before my mind fully cleared, I reached across the bed for Noel and touched only cool sheets. I lay there staring at the ceiling. Morning light slipped through the curtains in thin gray bars. Dust drifted in the air. Somewhere downstairs a cabinet opened and shut. Then another. Then the microwave door. Small kitchen noises. Everyday noises. But without Noel's cough, without the soft rustle of his newspaper, without the sound of coffee being poured into his favorite blue mug, those little noises felt like they belonged to somebody else's house. I forced myself up and dressed slowly. My black funeral dress still hung over the chair by the window. I passed it and put on a plain cream sweater and slacks instead. In the bathroom I looked older than 71. Not just because of the lines in my face. Because of the vacancy behind my own eyes. In the kitchen, Romy was scrolling on her phone while the coffee maker ran. "Morning," she said, barely looking up. "Morning." There were only 2 mugs out on the counter. Not 3. My place had been erased overnight from some little domestic calculation she made without thinking. Or maybe with a great deal of thought. I made myself toast and sat at the table. Wade came in 10 minutes later, kissed the top of Romy's head, poured coffee, and never once looked in my direction. Not one word about the night before. That was when I understood something important. If he had regretted it, even a little, I would have seen it in the morning. Shame rarely survives a night's sleep. But there was none in him. Only avoidance. After he left for work, I walked through the house and felt the absence of my husband in every room. His slippers were still by the bed. His reading glasses still rested on the side table in the den. His jacket still hung in the mudroom closet. But somehow I was the one already being treated like I no longer belonged there. The changes began as little inconveniences. By the 3rd day after the funeral, the Wi-Fi password had been changed. I found out because my tablet stopped connecting when I was trying to read messages from old friends. "Oh," Romy said from the kitchen island. "We updated it. I must have forgotten to tell you." She did not tell me then either. She just smiled that thin smile of hers and went back to replying to texts. The thermostat stopped responding the day after that. I stood in the hallway pressing the button twice. Before realizing it had been locked from someone else's phone. When I asked Wade about it, he said, "We're trying to watch the electric bill, Mom." We. Not you and me. Not the house. We. That same afternoon I went into my bedroom and found 3 empty moving boxes stacked against the wall near my dresser. Flat. New. Waiting. I stood there for a moment looking at them. Romy appeared behind me so quietly I almost startled. "I picked those up from the hardware store," she said. I figured it'd be easier if we start getting things sorted. For later, she said. So it's not overwhelming. Her voice was soft, careful, almost compassionate. That was her talent. She rarely sounded cruel while doing cruel things. She dressed everything in reason. When Wade came home, I asked him directly, "Are you planning for me to move?" He took off his coat, avoided my eyes. "We're just thinking ahead. Thinking ahead. As if I were a sofa they might someday donate." That evening, I went into the hallway and noticed the framed photo from our 25th anniversary was gone from the shelf. I found it in a drawer in the sideboard, face down. I did not ask who put it there. I already knew. Grief makes you remember odd things. Not the grand speeches. Not the anniversaries. Small things. The way Noel used to leave one button on his work shirts undone if he was distracted. The way he always whistled under his breath when checking the mailbox. The way he would pause in the kitchen doorway every evening and ask, "You all right in here, Mert?" That was what he called me. Mert. No one else did. A week before he died, we had sat in the den after dinner while rain tapped at the windows. He had his slippers on and a file folder open in his lap. I remember teasing him about still looking at paperwork after retirement. "I like knowing where things stand," he said. "With the house?" I asked. "With everything." Then he looked at me over his glasses and said something I barely registered at the time. "If anything ever happens to me, don't let anybody rush you. Promise me that." I laughed lightly. Who would rush me? He closed the folder. "Promise me anyway." So I did. Sitting alone in our bedroom days after the funeral, I thought about that conversation over and over. At the time it had felt like the kind of practical comment older couples make when they've been together long enough to discuss hard things without drama. But now it felt like a warning folded neatly into ordinary life. That night, after Wade and Romy had gone to bed, I opened Noel's nightstand and looked through the drawer I had avoided since he died. Insurance papers. A flashlight. Breath mints. A small church bulletin folded in half. And under those, an envelope with my name written on it in Noel's blocky handwriting. Myrtle. Inside was a single key and a note. First National. Ask for Helen. Take your ID. Don't sign anything in this house. I sat on the edge of the bed holding that note for a very long time. Then I folded it and tucked it inside my purse. The next morning, I left before Romy came downstairs. The sunrise had just begun to lighten the sky. The neighborhood looked washed out and quiet. Sprinklers clicked across front lawns. A dog barked somewhere far off. I hadn't taken the city bus alone in years, but I didn't want to ask Wade for a ride, and I certainly didn't want Romy knowing where I was going. At the bus stop, I sat on the metal bench with Noel's note in my coat pocket and my purse clutched in both hands. The cold seeped through the fabric of my gloves. I watched cars pass and thought about turning back twice. At the bank, a woman in her early 60s with short silver hair looked up from behind a desk and stared at me for just a second longer than politeness required. "Myrtle Henderson? You're Helen." She stood and came around the desk to take my hand. "I'm so sorry about Noel." That nearly undid me. Not because she said anything special. Because she said his name like he had been real, like he still occupied space in the world. She guided me into her office, closed the door, and asked how she could help. I handed her the key and Noel's note. She read it once, then looked at me differently. More carefully. "Did Noel explain any of this to you before he passed?" "No," she nodded, as if that answer didn't surprise her. She unlocked a drawer-sized safe cabinet, took out a slim metal box and set it on the desk between us. Inside were documents, account statements, and a packet with my name typed across the front. I remember staring at it and thinking how strange it was that my own name could feel like a revelation. Helen spread the papers out slowly. Joint checking, savings, then separate accounts, certificates of deposit, a trust, a beneficiary designation, notes from an attorney, all of it structured over years. Quietly, deliberately. "Your husband was very thorough," she said gently. "A great deal of this is in your name alone." I looked up at her. "In mine?" "Yes." My throat tightened. "Wade said the house was Noel's. He said now it would pass to him." Helen's expression changed. Not shocked. Concerned. "That is not how these documents read, Mrs. Henderson." For the first time since the funeral, my hands stopped shaking. Helen spent nearly an hour walking me through everything. The main household account was ordinary enough. I recognized it. But then came the accounts I did not know existed. A money market account opened 7 years earlier. 2 certificates rolled over annually. A trust funded in small, regular transfers from business proceeds after Noel sold his company. There was even a letter from an attorney confirming certain protections over the house itself. I listened in silence. Not because I had nothing to say. Because I was trying to reassemble my understanding of my own life. All this time Wade and Romy had been speaking about me like I was an aging inconvenience clinging to a home that never really belonged to me. All this time Noel had been laying bricks beneath the surface, one quiet safeguard at a time. Why didn't he tell me? I finally asked. Helen folded her hands. I can't speak for him. But from the notes here I'd say he didn't want to worry you. And perhaps, he suspected there might be pressure after he passed. Pressure. What a small word for what was happening in that house. Before I left, Helen gave me the card of the attorney who had drafted most of the documents. Patricia Chan. Call her today, she said. And Myrtle? Don't mention any of this at home until you've spoken to counsel. I nodded. Outside the world looked different. The same streets. The same traffic lights. The same low winter sun reflecting off windshields. But I no longer felt like a woman standing at the edge of a cliff. I felt like someone who had just discovered the ground beneath her feet was stronger than she had been told. On the bus ride back, my phone buzzed with a text from Wade. Romy says you went out. Everything okay? I stared at it for a moment, then put the phone back in my purse without replying. By the time I reached home, I had made one decision. I would not confront them in anger. I would let the truth arrive properly dressed. Patricia Chin's office was downtown, on the 8th floor of a brick building with a narrow lobby and old brass elevator doors. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-40s, with dark hair pinned neatly back and a voice that wasted no time. She read through the documents Noel had prepared, making small notes in the margins. When she finished, she looked up and said, "Your husband anticipated a challenge." I sat straighter. From my son. From anyone who might try to pressure you into surrendering control. She explained the structure plainly. The house was not simply Noel's property passing automatically to Wade. Portions of the title and authority were linked to the trust. Certain assets remained fully under my control. Business proceeds had been preserved in ways Wade could not touch without legal standing. And according to one addendum, no sale, transfer, or refinancing of the property could occur while I lived there unless I personally approved it. I asked the question I had been carrying all day. Can they force me out? No, the word was simple. Clean. I let it settle. Patricia continued. But they can make life unpleasant. Which means our first task is not emotional. It's practical. We made a list. Update contact information on all accounts. Restrict access. Notify the trust administrator. Freeze any attempts to represent me without written authorization. She advised me to copy all household paperwork still in the home, and remove anything sentimental or irreplaceable as soon as possible. I don't want revenge, I told her. Her expression softened just a little. Good. Revenge makes people sloppy. Protection is usually enough. When I returned home that afternoon, Wade was standing in the front hallway with his keys in hand. Where were you? Out. He waited for more. I gave him none. At dinner, Romy was extra sweet. Asked if I needed anything. Offered me more potatoes. Smiled too often. That meant they were nervous. And nervous people start making mistakes. The first mistake came 3 days later. I was in the laundry room folding towels when I heard Romy's voice rise from the kitchen. Not shouting. Sharpening. I don't understand what you mean we're not authorized. A pause. Then, he's her son. Another pause. Then silence. I kept folding towels. A few minutes later Wade stormed in through the back door, still wearing his office badge. Mom, did you change something at the bank? I looked up from the towels. Yes. What? Information that needed to be updated. He stared at me, caught off guard by the plainness of my answer. Romy tried to ask about Dad's accounts. Those are not Romy's accounts. They affect this household. I placed the towel neatly on top of the stack. No. They affect me. For a second something flickered across his face. Anger, yes. But under it, confusion. He had been so sure of the story he was telling himself that my resistance felt like a flaw in the machinery. That evening, they argued in their room with the door nearly shut. I did not need to hear every word. Tone was enough. The next morning, the boxes disappeared from my bedroom. My Wi-Fi password was texted to me. The thermostat began working again. Small restorations. Temporary civility. The kind people perform when they realize the person they meant to steamroll may, in fact, own the road. But the house had changed too much to return to what it was. I began quietly removing things that mattered. Noelle's watch. Our wedding album. My mother's quilt. The letters my son had written me from college before marriage sanded all the softness off him. I placed them in a locked suitcase and brought them to Patricia's office one load at a time. Romy watched me once from the front window as I loaded a bag into the trunk of a taxi. She didn't ask what was inside. She was starting to understand that not knowing had become dangerous. The family meeting was Wade's idea. He said it in the stiff, managerial tone he used when pretending emotion was efficiency. We need to sit down and talk this through like adults. So we did. Saturday, 4 p.m. dining room. The same table. The same overhead light. The same empty chair where Noelle used to sit. Romy began with the voice she reserved for difficult customer service calls. Myrtle, I think there's been some misunderstanding about what Wade meant the other night. No, I said. There wasn't. Silence. Wade cleared his throat. Mom, we're just trying to be realistic. That house is a lot for one person. It has been one person before, I said. He looked irritated. That's not the point. I folded my hands on the table. Then say the point plainly. Romy glanced at him, then back at me. We thought downsizing might be healthier for everyone. We assumed the estate plan was straightforward. It isn't. I took the folder Patricia had prepared and slid copies across the table. Wade looked down. Romy leaned in first. There is a kind of silence that comes from grief. And another kind that comes from numbers. This was the second kind. Wade's face changed as he read. Once. Then again. Romy went very still. The house can't be sold, she asked. Not without my approval. The accounts are not yours. Wade looked up at me as if he had misplaced the woman he thought he knew. Dad did all this behind our backs? I held his gaze. No. He did it in front of mine. I just didn't know how to read it yet. No shouting followed. No dramatic scene. Only a slow rearranging of power in a room that had already witnessed enough humiliation. I stood before either of them could recover. I will not be rushed, I said. I will not be managed. And I will not be spoken to the way you spoke to me again. Then I left the room. That time no one asked if I had heard them. 2 days later Wade knocked on my bedroom door. Actually knocked. It had been years since he had done that. Can I come in? I said yes. He stood just inside the room, hands at his sides, looking suddenly younger and more tired at once. Grief had found him at last, I realized. But not for his father. For the version of his life that was no longer available to him. I was out of line, he said. It wasn't a full apology. It didn't mention the word burden. Didn't mention the boxes. But it was the closest he had come. I looked at him for a long moment. You were cruel. He swallowed. Romy and I have been under a lot of stress. I nearly smiled at that. Not because it was funny. Because some people will walk all the way to the edge of truth and still choose not to step onto it. Your father had stress, I said quietly. He still managed not to throw his family away. Wade looked down. I thought, he stopped. Started again. I thought Dad was leaving things simple. He knew people are least simple after a death. That landed. He stood there another moment, then asked, Are you going to make us leave? There it was. The real question. No, I said. But I am going to make my own decision. He nodded once and left. That night I called Patricia and told her I wanted to move out on my own terms. Not because I had to. Because I no longer wished to remain in a house where love had to be proven by legal documents. She helped me find a short-term furnished cottage on the edge of town near a small lake. Quiet. 1 floor. Enough light. Enough distance. When I told Wade, he looked relieved before he looked ashamed. That told me everything I still needed to know. The cottage smelled like cedar and fresh paint. The first morning there, I stood at the window with a mug of coffee and watched sunlight move across the lake in broken ribbons. A pair of ducks crossed the water without hurry. No doors slammed. No drawers opened in accusation. No one monitored the thermostat. No one spoke to me as though I were an overdue bill. I unpacked slowly. My quilt on the sofa. Noel's watch in the top drawer. Our wedding photo on the small bookshelf in the living room. Not hidden. Not face down. It is a strange thing to build a life again in your 70s. The world tells you reinvention belongs to the young. Doesn't. Older women reinvent themselves all the time. We just do it quietly with boxes and paperwork and a refusal to explain ourselves. Wade called twice that first week. The conversations were careful. Almost formal. He asked if I needed help. I said no. He said he was sorry things had gotten messy. I did not rescue him from the weakness of that sentence by turning it into something larger. Romy didn't call at all. Instead, a card arrived in the mail. Plain white envelope. 3 typed lines. Wishing you comfort in your new place. Thank you for understanding how complicated this time has been for everyone. No signature beyond her name. I placed it in the kitchen drawer with appliance manuals and takeout menus. That seemed the right category for it. On Sundays, I began attending a small church by the lake. On Wednesdays, I had lunch with 2 widows I met there. We talked about blood pressure medicine, grandchildren, casseroles, and occasionally the strange freedom that comes after your life is torn open and resewn by your own hand. I still missed Noel every day. But missing him no longer meant losing myself. Months later, Wade came to visit alone. He stood on my porch holding a paper bag from the bakery I like. Older somehow. Softer around the eyes. We sat at my small kitchen table with coffee between us. I found Dad's old toolbox in the garage, he said after a while. He'd labeled everything. I smiled faintly. That sounds like him. Wade nodded. There was a note in there. About replacing the porch rail at the house before winter. He'd already measured the wood. We sat in silence for a moment, both picturing the same man. Practical. Quiet. Always finishing what others forgot to begin. Finally Wade said, I keep thinking about what I said to you. I looked at him. He did not look away this time. I can't take it back, he said. But I know now what kind of man says that to his mother, and I don't want to be him. That was the apology. Late. Incomplete. Human. I accepted it the only honest way I could. Then don't be. He cried a little then. Not dramatically. Just enough that he reached for a napkin and laughed once at himself through it. I did not comfort him the way I would have years ago. Some mercies should not be too easy. But I poured him more coffee. When he left, he hugged me in the doorway. Briefly. Carefully. I stood on the porch after his car disappeared and listened to the wind move through the trees. The lake beyond the cottages was silver in the afternoon light. Somewhere nearby a screen door shut. You're just a burden now. I had carried those words for months, turning them over until the sharp edges wore down enough for truth to show through. I was never the burden. I was the memory keeper, the bill payer, the holiday cook, the steady center no one noticed because it was always there. And when people confuse what supports them with what weighs them down, life has a way of correcting that mistake. Noel had known that. He did not leave me revenge. He left me room. Room to stand. Room to choose. Room to leave with my dignity still intact. That is how the story closes. Not with a slammed door. Not with shouting. Not with anyone ruined. Just with a woman in her 70s standing in a quiet kitchen that is finally her own. Knowing the difference between being needed and being valued. And never again accepting one in place of the other.